Hi, welcome to the Acid Left. We have a special edition where I'm talking to artist and activist Andrew Cooper, who campaigns regularly with Focus E15, a group based in East London who spend their time basically resisting gentrification and the poor living standards of people living in the area and further afield. So I basically asked Andrew on so we can speak about organisation. So I think, there's a kind of growing online left. There's a growing group of people who are making online content, who are engaging with that content, who are expressing a desire to see a kind of post-capitalist, perhaps socialist or a communist world. My concern right now is that as long as we're kind of engaging online, we're not engaging in the real world. So Andrew is somebody who's working, campaigning. He goes out every week in London in E15 and he works a stall with other activists and they speak to people about gentrification, about capitalism, about working conditions, about the fact that people have to use food banks to eat in the UK, or many people do. And I just want to speak to Andrew to get some advice for people out there. How does one act? How does one get out there and do stuff to mobilize people? So Andrew, you've made a kind of infographic video here, which is on loop behind us. And basically it just says organize. Then we have several words. So there's reach out, meet up, share knowledge, plan, speak out, take action. So this is all kind of quite self-explanatory stuff. So if you ask somebody, what does it mean to organize? This is kind of what they would say in some form, but people aren't maybe doing it so easily, or maybe we're kind of feeling we're doing something by being online. So I think it's important to, in any case, break down these kind of stages. So firstly, the term organize, how would you describe, I mean, it's a kind of daily word in use, but how would you describe organize as a term in a political sense?
Okay, well, first of all, I'm just going to say that anything that I say regarding the Focus E15 housing campaign is just from my point of view, from what I see happening. And I think that the campaign is a good illustration of what the word organise means, because it was started by a group of mothers who were in this hostel called, at that time it was called Focus E15. That was the name of the hostel. Later it changed to Brimstone House. And they were being told that they would have to leave, I believe. And from that, they organised. There was a person called Jasmine Stone and her mum. They made this incredible organisation, and other people gravitated around that, and this organisation grew. But it's important to understand that it came out of oppression, that it was people's response to oppression. And, one of the things Lenin talks about is the need to go into the deepest layers of the proletariat. And that's where you're going to get the resistance, because one of the things is that you're talking about, I believe, it's where people feel the axe comes down on their neck, where they feel the boot on their head, or where they feel kind of completely isolated or alienated. That then it's at that point that people often, hopefully that they do act.
But how does somebody reach that? Because there's people who are desperate who aren't acting. And then there's maybe people who aren't desperate, who have many ideas about how one should act, or one needs to act but don't really do it, who have read Marx, etc. So how would you put these two groups together?
Okay, so I think that you have to, well, as people that say, for example, have read Marx or have have understanding what capitalism is.
Mm.
Yeah. So I'm assuming that, well, I don't think we should ever assume that people know what capitalism is. Sometimes the words of the oppressor are really describe it very well. So Colonel Grogan, who was a British colonialist,
Mm-hmm.
who was concerned with setting up, I think it was plantations in Kenya, was very upset. And the reason why he was upset is because he said, I'll have to paraphrase him, he said that, well, we've got their land, but now we need to get their limbs. And the problem was that the people whose land they had taken had literally ran off and were farming further off in the mountains, and they organised to make sure that they would work, that bring them back and make sure that they would work. And this is what capitalism is. So capitalism, basically, when you go to the job centre, you have to sell your labour on the labour market. And notice I said the word have to.
Mm-hmm.
So this is the coercion. And what we're seeing is more and more coercion. And obviously there's a mass of people in places like the UK and America that are unemployed. And we should never forget that unemployment is structurally part of capitalism. So this may be what Marx called the lumpen proletariat, what you could call the deepest layers of the proletariat, where people are experiencing the direct coercion of capitalism. They might be denying you a place to live. They might be denying you food to eat. We've had people starving, so this is happening now. So in that situation, you don't have to be educated about what the real of capitalism is. But unfortunately, there's a whole layer of what Lenin called opportunism. You asked me to speak about Lenin. So, and opportunism emerges in countries where they've got a developed capitalist system, where they've exported, their main export becomes actually finance capital. And if people are interested, they can read about this in Imperialism, the highest stage of capitalism. So someone came into where I work and they were talking about education, and they said that the peak of social mobility in UK was 1973. So given the post-war reforms, it took them, say, 3 decades to really start rolling them back. And there's this a nostalgia to want to roll the wheel back to post-war reforms. And in 1948, when they were doing reforms in this country, they were doing genocide in Malaya for rubber and tin. And you can look at, to bump up the post-war economy, and you can look up this stuff.
But this kind of thing of people wanting to return to a stronger welfareism, and you're saying, well, actually, that was anyway part of the capitalist system. This kind of desire, this kind of longing for the kind of post-war welfare state is in itself not maybe an answer, and then also the longing for a Nordic system. Everyone's sort of saying, why don't we have a system like in Scandinavia that also is kind of not really what we need, because they're capitalist countries anyway. To some extent, their wealth is going to be reliant on a kind of post-imperialist system.
Yeah.
So you're kind of saying what we need is something much bigger than that. We need a bigger shift than that.
Yeah, I mean, we do. I mean, and don't get me wrong, I'm not saying things. I mean, I am very, very grateful to, any educational stuff I've received, and even like when my parents, dying in hospital or whatever, that there is a hospital there,
Mm-hmm.
Things like that you can't take for granted. And I just think we have to look at the contradictions, as Marxists, you have to look at the contradictions in things, honestly.
Yeah, I'm just thinking to get to like literally the reach out, but you're kind of saying that it's not like we need to reach out to some workers. It's kind of a layered thing. We need to reach out to many different people at different levels, different rather strata of society, um, because a lot of people are not understanding really what's going on. So in terms of like, we need to reach out. We need to step outside of our bubble. We need to speak to people and make them see what capitalism is doing. That's not as simple as we need to go and speak to the desperate people who need action, who see they need action immediately. It's maybe we need to speak also to the kind of quite comfortable people, or people who think they're comfortable.
Well, I don't know. I mean, I think that it's more. I suppose I was thinking about people from what you were saying, that have some kind of political understanding or theory. I mean, Marx's thesis on Fairback is quite clear, I think, and that's that you cannot have knowledge of something without being materially involved in it. Mm-hmm. So what I would say, going out on the street, if you're lucky enough to come across organisation, and you know, that's why I go to the Focus E15, because the organisation is there. And the organisation is theoretically informed. There are people that are Marxists and understand. And the boundary between activists and somebody that's forced into the struggle because of direct oppression breaks down. I mean, it breaks down very quickly. People realize we educate each other. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So I think that's the first thing I'd like to say is, in proper organisation, that dichotomy does break down. You educate each other, and that's the kind of culture we need, but you do it through action, through organising demonstrations, yeah? Through, and when I say reach out, it's exactly what you have to do. You have to, like the Focus E15 are in the same place every Saturday on the street. You have to do that, yeah? It's very academic if you don't do that. And you plan actions with people. So the reaching out is very important. It's absolutely pointless to be in a little clique, if it's an online clique or wherever, talking amongst yourselves. I think, I think that basically when Marx talk about class struggle, it's continuous.
And get out. So you say reach out and then meet up, share knowledge and plan. I mean, you've kind of gone over that people need to meet up, they need to share knowledge.
Yeah.
You're not saying like don't theorize. You're saying there's people who are very well informed theoretically in movements you've been involved with.
Yeah.
But that's not all one should do. That goes alongside action. And you say plan. Can you think of like an example of this? Where you've seen something planned, so some kind of people coming together, sharing knowledge, planning something, and then doing something that maybe worked to some extent.
You've got this machine, for example, like with the housing thing, you've got a council, and the council, they're keeping 400 empty flats on the Carpenter's estate in E15 London, while people are put in places which they themselves actually describe like prison cells, where you get a bunk bed for your kid, and you've got I think it's like minimum 17 square feet. They even told somebody recently that their 3-year-old had to sleep on the sofa in one room, so there's all the family in one room. And what we do is we can do actions where we go, where they're seen by the press that highlight this stuff, and it shames the council, because the council is a bureaucracy, and bureaucracy is very interesting because they'll say things like, "Oh, it's the central government," which is kind of right, but they are taking decisions where they have empty places, where they're kind of thinking they're going to wait for the property developers to kind of, give them money to refurbish or, knock down housing estates to build on them. And so we show them up. You can show these people up. And one of the ways is you have to undercut the mask of bureaucracy. The mask of bureaucracy says, well, this is the system we live in. And anyway, it's not my fault. It's the organisation over there. And we have to hold these councillors to account. Yeah, they're not going to like it. And especially, if they're, unfortunately, I have to say it, quite often we find ourselves, Newham is a Labour borough. It's supposed to be a left Labour borough.
Speaking out, you kind of already covered this, but you're saying get the message to councillors in your area, get the message to people who make decisions. First, how does one get that message to them? Can you recall an instance of speaking to a councillor? I'm sure you have many. But also, how do you think a councillor feels when somebody is confronted? Because there's kind of a notion of like, this doesn't make any difference. But, what do you think the effect is on a public servant who is confronted and told something?
Well, it's like, when we do action, like we did I thought it was quite an amazing action where we took arrows down saying empty homes with people from the aptly named Brimstone House, which is now the Focus E15 hostel. There's about 200 people crammed into like little cell-like flats, to the empty housing estate that's being kept empty for redevelopment. It's been empty for 14 years, the Carpenter's estate. I think it's maybe 15 now. And we marched down there, in the press. What you tend to, we marched down there, and the press was there. What happens is basically when we highlight these things, I'm not going to go into specific because you can go to the Focus E15 website and see who. But, they do things like, suddenly someone does get a flat. Someone does get, someone isn't, frequently people are told, and they get away with it because they think they can pick people off in isolation, So once we get on the case, those people are not in isolation. And there's other people that have been through the same thing in our organisation. So when the council tells people, you and your child or children, we've got a flat for you, but it's in Bradford, 200 miles away. And they said, well, I can't take that because I've got a cleaning job or my family's here, whatever, yeah. I can't take a flat 200 miles away. The council will say to them, well, look, if you don't take it, you'll make yourself intentionally homeless and we'll rehouse your children, but not you. This is 2020, right? And this is because capitalism is in crisis. They're having problems with extraction of surplus value all over the world. This is the capitalist crisis that hasn't recovered since 2008. And now they're turning on to a sort of form of land cannibalism by, building on people's council estates, denying people places to live, building luxury places which no one in London can afford to live in. We highlight what people are going through with their involvement, speaking out. Who's doing the speaking out? It's them, People with encouragement have their own way of speaking. And it's very, very powerful, believe me. When people, like you can see Agnes on the microphone there. She was decanted, that means moved off the Carpenter's estate. And she has to see that estate sit empty for 15 years. She loved it there. And now she speaks on the microphone. So who's an activist and who's, you know what I mean? It's like they want to say we're like troublemakers or whatever. Well, I'll tell you what, everybody needs to learn to be a troublemaker. That's that's the words, Like basically, if we don't make trouble for them, they make even worse trouble for us, and they take people out in isolation, and that's unacceptable. It's unacceptable that people are in places, they're completely depressed. You know, they tell me they get disorientation. I would, if I was in one of those places. You know, I'm lucky I've got social housing. But this is the meaning, what we discover is the meaning of the word solidarity. You see the word organise, jigsaw puzzle, all the different pieces fitting together. How can you fit a piece together if you're just staring at your computer screen all day? You can't do that. You've got to get out. You can only learn what Marx is saying about the world through getting out there and talking to people. You know, you have to try and do that in some capacity. And I know it's really difficult, because a lot of grassroots organisations gets hijacked by reform people that basically want to make it all about a particular parliamentary party, and that can be a nightmare. But we need to do this. We need to discover what that word means on our own terms. You know, our own collective terms. Is that?
I think that's what we wanted to hear. I thought that's, you know, why you should come on and speak on our channel, because people really, you know, they are stuck online. It's a syndrome of our age very much. It affects more young people, I think, and it affects people of different political persuasions. But within the left, I'm seeing people online, they make stuff. Maybe they're happy about meeting up with people. It's great to meet, you know, like-minded people online. You don't feel so alone. Maybe you kind of go through text together. But you know, at the same time, you know, are we kind of somehow taking some of the best minds, or, you know, the minds that might, and bodies that might get out there and do something, that might get out there and organize along with other people? Are we kind of like taking them and incapacitating them in our bubble, or you know, or is it rather it's an effect of the internet as such, and of capitalism? But you know, we who think we're pretty smart, spreading left-wing messages online, might actually be in a sense culpable of immobilizing each other in a way. And maybe it's time to kind of prod each other out of solidarity and say we need to get out there, not just be, being smartasses online, really. So that's really what I wanted to hear, and I think that pretty much wraps it up. Have you got anything else to say to add to that?
I would just add that we did a brilliant. There was a brilliant webinar thing. So I'm saying that, and this was with Mums for Housing in the USA, which is in Oakland, California. And again, that seems to have had similar origins to the Focus E15. So it's basically, we just got to get out there and get stuck in. You can't learn about the things that you've been reading about or theorizing about if you're a Marxist without. I mean, don't forget. Just one last point. Don't forget, Marx founded the International. He actually did that. He wasn't an academic. Marx was a revolutionary. And I think that that's not just a moral point. That's a point about knowledge. You can't have knowledge. You can't produce knowledge without being involved in the substance of what you're trying to have knowledge about to go forward.
Thank you. Yeah, I think that's very important. And thank you for coming on. I will post links about Focus E15 and any other groups you want to mention or points you want to mention. And I hope to have you back soon. Cheers.
Bye-bye.